Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, TigerTang12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we're going to be reviewing the Löwe. This is one of the original tier 8 premium heavy tanks that came into World of Tanks a very long time ago. One of my first premium vehicles. I think it was my first premium vehicle, to be fair. And I think this is the best premium tier 8 heavy tank out of the three. Which tanks am I talking about? I'm talking about the T-34, I'm talking about the KV-5. KV-5 and the T-34. The T-34 was buffed, I think, a couple of years ago. The KV-5 never received any real buffs because it has preferential matchmaking, it doesn't have to face tier 10 vehicles. The T-34, on the other hand, it still doesn't perform as well, especially with the occurrence or the appearance of new premium tanks at tier 8. Like, for example, the Defender, for example, the Chrysler GF, the E75 TS, the Scorpion G. Do I have to go on? If you think about it, it was clear that someday these vehicles will no longer be at the highest point or the biggest and baddest vehicles at the tier. So that makes a lot of sense. The Löwe, on the other hand, though, why I would choose this if I had to choose any single one of the three vehicles, mainly just has to do with the fact that this vehicle was the one that was buffed the most recent, and it actually does fit into the game quite nicely now. You can see I have a 3 mark on this tank, and 3 marking this vehicle, I think, has gotten more difficult recently, because now you need to have a moving damage of 2,507 to achieve a 95% marks of excellence, or the 3rd mark of excellence right there. To achieve that, well, you're going to need to do a lot of damage or to support your team by getting assistance damage. In other words, spotting or tracking somebody. And you can see my loadout on this tank is rather unique. You can see that I have equipment, I have the, I have vents, equipment, yeah. On the equipment slots I have vents, I have the gun rammer class 1, and I have optics class 1, which is rather interesting because this tank comes equipped with 400 meters basic base view range. And I've equipped the coated optics class on this as well. Why did I do that? Because previously the Löwe did not have enough hull armor to withstand anything from close range. Now if you look at the upper plate, it is 150 millimeters thick and it goes all the way to 250 at this angle. I can show you guys that with the armor viewer right here. It's like 230, 240, and then you have like 250 at certain angles. So that is pretty damn impressive for a tier 8 heavy tank. It's also a very heavy vehicle. It's almost 100 tons, but it's actually quite mobile for being 100 tons. It's not like the mouse. It's possible to get to certain parts of the map without having to wait for a very, very long time. So the Löwe kind of combined the great gun with a very, very bad kind of hull and turret armor, and that made it a bit difficult to play back in the days because everyone was able to go through. But the novelty of having a gun with 234 millimeters of pen, 320 alpha, not a very good rate of fire, but very good accuracy and aim time. That novelty was something that you did not see a lot back in the days in 2013 or 2012 or 2011. I think this tank is dated back to 2011 when it came out in the beta. Then this tank was released. So yeah, I've been playing this vehicle for 9 years. I have 3,000 games in it almost, I think. Let me check real fast. Yeah, 2,827. And I haven't really played it as much recently. That's why you can still see that the equipment hasn't really changed, because obviously the vehicle now has much better armor. Its mobility is still the same. The firepower is great. The gun handling is great. The reload time is still a bit of a unfortunate side thing, but you can see we have the equipment right here, the gun rammer class 1 and vents to get that maximum boost out of it. But I'm probably going to be taking away the coated optics, because coated optics, I think right now with all the other vehicles, the light tanks, the EBRs, all that stuff that we have running around, I think most other vehicles have enough, you know, view range to spot for us, and we don't have to be, you know, passive in the back anymore, because this tank now has armor, so we can be active, we can be on the prowl, we can go in there and do some serious amount of damage with this tank. So that's why I'm going to be using the improved hardening tool, and I'm going to be replacing it right there with the vert, with the ventilations, to put that right into the slot so I get more survivability. You can see that 1820, that's going to give us quite a bit of additional HP. So yeah, what can I say about the Löwe? It is basically now the best out of the three. It really is competitive with its gun. Its rate of fire is not good, but it has great gun depression. It has great aim time, accuracy. It is not the fastest, but it's not the slowest either. It has 100 tons, so you can ram stuff with it. It has decent survivability now, especially if you can hide the lower plate. You're going to be doing very, very fine with this vehicle. The upper plate, obviously, at certain angles, people will be able to penetrate you, but I still think that the Löwe at this stage is really, really competitive. And I like that. I like that this Löwe, that at least one of the three premium tanks hasn't gone down that rabbit hole of never having gotten an upgrade and just being like completely irrelevant. It's still very relevant. It's a premium tank that has the accuracy of almost a tier 9 medium tank, like the Leopard Prototype A, or maybe even a tank destroyer. That is pretty damn impressive if you think about it. So yeah, I definitely think you can expect a lot of the Löwe. You cannot expect a lot from the T-34. The KV-5 is like a situational vehicle. If you get into a good matchup against some tier 8s that don't have a lot of pen and they don't know your weak spot, you're going to have a blast in that vehicle probably, especially with that rate of fire, but the pen on that vehicle will let you down. The T-34 on the other hand is just very good in hull down positions. You can see I have the 3 mark on that vehicle as well, but the 3 mark on the T-34 is probably somewhere below, oh yeah, it's 2,200. That's still pretty competitive if you think about it, but it's certainly not as good as the Löwe. So if you have the choice, the Löwe is definitely my first choice. The KV-5 is the most unique vehicle that you'll never get anymore, probably. That thing is gone out of the game. They might sell it maybe in like 5 years, in 2025, when they've sold it the last time, like 5 years ago. Like it's 10 years anniversary and they're going to be selling it. I don't know, but the Löwe certainly is one of those tanks that has stood the test of time and has even improved during that time. So that's enough talking about the stats, about all of the things. Let's go into a matchup and see what the Löwe can do in the year 2020 after being in the game for almost 10 years. So I have prepared 2 games that we're going to take a look at today, and hopefully these 2 games will show us what the Löwe is all about, what its capabilities are, what its limits are, and just what kind of a vehicle we basically have in our hands. Now the Löwe is not a small tank. It is a rather large tank, to be fair. It is a German super heavy vehicle. It weighs, I think, 100 tons or almost 100 tons, so that is a heavy vehicle, and it means it is a big vehicle. You can see we're top tier in this matchup, going up against some tier 7 vehicles, and it does seem to be, or at least look like, a very nice kind of setup. But as soon as you take a closer look, you do see 3 artillery pieces on the enemy team. And this, especially with this kind of map, with Westfield, is basically the worst case scenario that you can find yourself in a super heavy tank. Because we do have to play this ridgeline. Because if we do not play this ridgeline, they will just overpower us, because we're just one of 3 heavy tanks. and we have to take into account that we're going to get smacked by artillery. So what can you do in a situation like this? The Löwe does grant you great gun depression. You get 10 degrees of gun depression, you have a lot of armor, especially against these tier 7 opponents. You're going to be bouncing a lot of things if you can stay hauled down. Now the artillery problem is going to be an entire different story on the other hand. So you just have to find a way to either you sit way in the back, but that wouldn't really be the right kind of move, especially if you're playing a Löwe, or you play really aggressive like we are, but you put yourself into a very risky position of getting knocked out by artillery. What you can see right here is a Löwe on Löwe engagement, and with the same amount of gun depression right here, he is going to be able to put shots into me, I'm going to be able to put shots into him, and especially with artillery, this does make it a lot more difficult. And this game is going to be over very quickly. As mentioned, this is one of the worst case scenarios that you can find yourself in if you're playing a Löwe, because this vehicle out in the open with 3 artillery pieces is just not going to be very competitive, especially if you do have to push the enemy heavy tanks and you have no other option but to play aggressive. You could see that the entire enemy firepower, especially the S51 and the GW Panther, were on top of us, and the armor will not hold up if the opponent is another Löwe and they are able to go through your lower plate. Your turret and your upper plate are your strength, but that amount of armor and the amount of HP is just nothing against 3 artillery pieces. And it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you are. If you're a super heavy like this and you're going up against 3 artillery pieces, you're not going to have a good day. We will win this game though, because we managed to play aggressive, because we managed to take out these guys, take the brunt of the damage, get like 3,000 or almost 4,000 combined damage, and in the end, you know, just push through. We actually did more than 4,000 combined damage, and that is pretty damn impressive, considering there were 3 artilleries. And that is just sometimes a role that you have to take in if you're playing a vehicle that is just not very mobile. Well, you have to be the sacrificial lamb, do as much damage as you can, try to help your team break through, and if they manage to go through the base to take the win, it is probably because of your sacrifice at the beginning that they were able to do that. So yeah, this is the worst case scenario you can find yourself in any kind of super heavy tank, especially the Löwe. And I think in the KV5 it would have been very similar. The thing is just you wouldn't have been as competitive against the other Löwe and maybe the other vehicles because of your lack of pen. You would have been an even bigger target for artillery. In a T-34 it would have been a very similar kind of story. But I'd say let's move on to the next game, see what the real strengths of the Löwe are actually in, and we're going to figure that out. What happens if you are not the top tier vehicle? You can see we're playing against a couple of tier 9s and a couple of tier 7s as well. We're on the map Fjords, and this time around the Löwe is not going to be as easily taken out by artillery because there's only one S51 and no other RD pieces, and you can see that the map is a lot more covered. Especially for a heavy tank, this is a great kind of opportunity. So a Löwe, what can a Löwe do on this kind of map? Well, your mobility with 35 kilometers per hour top speed is going to limit you a bit in the sense of where you can go. Obviously, if I were in a fast heavy tank or a medium tank, I would most of the time go to E4 or E5 because there you can be really competitive, you can control the middle, you can control the northern part of the map, and you can control the southern part, at least a bit of it. And from there you're very centrally, you can always reposition in case you need to do that. And yeah, in a Löwe, well, 35 kilometers per hour for a super heavy tank, you will be able to reach it, that kind of speed, but not all the time. Right there you can see we actually just were penned by the SU-122-44, which is actually hidden somewhere in the back. Thing is just, it was I think it was a blind shot because we were not spotted. And the very weird thing right there is that he actually managed to penetrate our gun breech, probably because we were looking down. And what a weird kind of angle, weird shot. And he managed to do 398 damage and also knock out our, I think it was our engine? I'm not entirely sure, but he knocked out one internal module that was quite important to us, and I immediately repaired it. So this right here is a great position for the Löwe because, as you can see, with this kind of turret armor and with this kind of setup right in front of you where you have like cover for your lower plate, which is your main weak spot, you can bully a lot of tanks. And right there you were able to see that we were able to bully this T-30 very effectively, and we bounced a shot off the Waffenträger of Panzer IV and other vehicles as well. The problem is just that with a tank such as this, you're going to be very limited, especially if your team is going to be rounding up the enemy vehicles in a very quick succession. And if you cannot get to them, well, you cannot really do any damage. Your rate of fire with, I think, about 6 rounds per minute, which is, I think, 9.9 second reload time for me at the moment, especially with I'm using equipment to actually boost those stats, will not allow you to be as competitive as other premium tier 8 heavy tanks, especially if you compare it to the KV5, which almost has, I think, a reload time of 7 seconds or maybe even less. And that will allow you to have a lot better DPM than the Löwe does. So you're very much limited in the way of where you're going, how you're going to be playing this tank, and you have to find the balance between playing aggressively and playing a bit more passively, because the Löwe is just one of those tanks that will really need the right decision making. Because if you're out in the open and you're playing against some tier 9 vehicles, maybe tier 10s, you're going to get easily penetrated by those vehicles if they hit your lower plate. If you're able to if you manage to hide your lower plate and to only use your upper plate and your turret, you might just bounce quite a lot of shells, especially at tier 8, but even at tier 9 and tier 10 you can be quite competitive. But the thing is, with a tank as the Löwe, with the size that it just has, it does always attract artillery. So being out in the open is still going to be an issue. And the problem is getting into those positions that are very offensive and that are very competitive is always going to be a bit of a problem if you're playing Löwe. You can see that we decided to actually go around the southern part of the map and just do an entire roundabout. And it was a bit of a bad decision for us because we are not able to do any real damage right here. The same thing with the gun handling right here. The aim time that you have on this tank is actually not the greatest, especially if you consider it to be like a sniping vehicle. It sometimes will let you down in the accuracy compartment and the aim time compartment. That is something that is very different in a lot of other tier 8 premium tanks that have come over the time. But I'd still say that the Löwe is, out of the 3 vehicles that we have tested, the original tier 8 premium tanks, the KV5, the T-34 and the Löwe, it probably is still the most competitive vehicle. Not by extremely much, but especially considering armor and just the competitiveness of your gun, you're going to be having a lot more fun playing this kind of tank than playing the T-34 or the KV5. Now obviously this was not a very flashy display of this tank, but to be fair, the Löwe was never really a flashy tank. And you can see I've had the 3rd mark on this vehicle for a very long time now because I've played over 2,900 games in this tank. And to be fair, now in the recent time, since they added a lot of other premium tanks like the Renegade, like the Defender, like the Scorpion G, all of these types of tanks, the IS-3A, I think the Löwe still fits in that category. It still can be a very good premium tank, but it just, you know, it just doesn't hold a candle to the Renegade in my opinion, because the Renegade has a great gun, it has great armor, it has great mobility, and it just kind of outpaces the Löwe in all of those regards. And you now have the E75 TS, which has like basically the same amount of armor. The lower plate is a bit more of a weak spot, but other than that, the E75 TS is more mobile. It has a very aggressive gun, which is also 105mm gun, and it has great pen. And overall, it just kind of makes you feel like that the old premium tanks, that especially the people that have bought them way back years ago when they were still like a new part of the game, they must feel a bit abandoned by Wargaming, because especially the T-34 and the KB5, both of these vehicles are just no longer really relevant as premium tanks, and the Löwe just hangs on barely right there. It's not the greatest, it's not the worst, it's still great at being hauled down. It's incredible at being hauled down. Let's face it, it has 10 degrees of gun depression. Being hauled down with this vehicle, if you can hide away from the artillery, this tank can be really, really good. But it is kind of situational. The lower plate armor will not hold up against tier 9s and tier 8s and tier 10s, but the turret armor is great. So you have to find yourself a position to hide your lower plate. You have to be you have to be able to plan ahead. If you take a look at the map, you have to analyze where you can go with this tank, because once you go to that certain position, you will no longer be able to reposition again. So that's very important. So I'd say let's have a short conclusion, and we'll pile up the pros and cons of the Löwe. And after we've done that, we can just go straight ahead and finish this video up. So we have finally reached the stage of the conclusion in this video, and the question is, should you get the Löwe or should you not get the Löwe? And which of the three tanks is the best out of the three? The KB5, the T-34, or the Löwe? We'll finish this Holy Trinity video, and we're going to wrap it up right now. So we have compiled several different pro and con stances, and I have written a conclusion which I will now tell you guys. You should see everything on screen, so it should be very clear what kind of a mindset I had when I reviewed the Löwe. Obviously, it's also going to be subjective because I have used this tank for over 2,500 games. So this is always going to be a vehicle that I will hold dearly to my heart. So where do we start? The Löwe is a vehicle that has great pen, incredible gun depression, and elevation angles. That is one of the first pros that I can think of. This tank with 232mm of pen can compete against tier 9 vehicles and even tier 10s. It has great turret armor and great upper plate armor as well. So it can be very effective in hull down situations and in places where only the turret is shown, or sometimes even when the lower plate is open. Because the armor on this vehicle, generally speaking, is pretty damn good. It's a super heavy German tank, so yeah, the armor is top notch, although the lower plate is a weak spot. Other than that, your hull at the front is pretty good. The sides, obviously, it is a heavy tank that has very, very clear cut and 90-degree angled sides, so it's not going to be bouncing anything from the side, but from the front, this tank is very competitive. The side armor with 100mm, though, is still quite good, so you can side scrape with this tank most of the time, and they even increased the place where the armor does align with the turret right there. Moving on, the HP of this tank is certainly a pro as well. 1,650, you'll be able to get shot several times at tier 8, still survive, and if you even put the equipment on, which allows you to get even more HP, which is the equipment right down here, the improved hardening class 1, you'll get an additional 170 HP, which will, in the end, probably help you in a lot of engagements. For its weight, it has decent speed, 35 kilometers per hour top speed, but it will take a while to reach that top speed with the weight that this tank just has. It is 100 tons heavy, it is a German super heavy vehicle. You will not expect it to be very fast, but 35 kilometers per hour is actually pretty damn decent. Overall, I'd say it is a great credit earner and an all-round good vehicle. So if you do end up with a Löwe, it is probably not the worst vehicle to have. We're moving on to the cons section now, and the main cons that I can find with this vehicle after having played so many games in it is its rate of fire and its accuracy. The rate of fire in this tank is not very good. It has a 105mm gun and a max DPM, if we check into it, of 1896. There are a lot of other tier A premium heavy tanks that do a lot better job of having a 105mm gun and better DPM. Sometimes even the same amount of pen, if you just look at the Renegade, for example. The accuracy with 0.3 at 100 meters dispersion is also not very good. If you compare it, I mean, this tank with the gun, it is the most accurate out of the KB5 and the T34, but 0.3 is a bit of a shock to me because I always thought that the Löwe had decent accuracy, but 0.3, it's okay for a heavy tank. I would say it's not too bad, but I mean, for the Löwe with that bad kind of a rate of fire, you would at least expect it to be even better. But let's put it at that. The general mobility of this tank, turning tracks around, reaching the 35 kilometers are certainly not the biggest pros of this tank, and I would rather consider it a con. It's not very mobile. If you choose a single flank, you'll most certainly be going through that flank and dying there, or you'll push right through. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to reposition if, especially it's an open field, if the time in the game is just not long enough, you'll find yourself in a bit of a pickle if you choose the wrong position. And it can be really frustrating if you go to the wrong place, especially if there's 3 artillery pieces aiming at you in an open field. That brings me to the next problem. Its size and, generally speaking, its huge profile. This tank is gigantic. It is a super heavy tank, yes, don't get me wrong. I know that it is supposed to be big. The thing is just that it makes it very difficult to stay hidden, to hide it somewhere, to hide it from artillery behind buildings, because it will stick out. Keep that in mind. If you do get this tank, it is really, really big, and with that much armor comes a price, and that is just that this tank is very large. Being large can be a bit of a problem, especially if you do encounter artillery that might just be looking at you looking for you because you're just such a big target. Then the other thing that I would say is a bit of a con is the price tag of this tank. It currently costs about $50, and I picked it up at $20, I think about 8 years ago. Obviously, with inflation, with the changes of the prices in World of Tanks itself, you cannot expect this tank to be going around for $20, but I think $50 is a bit much, especially if you look into it and you look at other vehicles. If you have the opportunity to get the E75 TS, which would also be around the same price tag, maybe even lower. I'm not even sure if I would be picking up the Löwe if there was competition like the E75 TS or the Renegade, because those vehicles just are a bit more competitive, and if you really want to have the best competitive vehicle for your money, maybe the Löwe would not be the first choice. It depends on your playstyle. It depends on what your objectives are and what kind of vehicle you want to have, how you want to play it, and if it doesn't really matter if the Löwe is like an OG vehicle in the game. So in conclusion, we can say that out of the 3 tanks, out of the T34, the KB5, And the Löwe, this vehicle, the Löwe, is the most competitive and still the most relevant today. It has gotten the best updates. It is still very strong with its upper plate, and it's still a very incredible, reliable fighter with its gun. It can be very effective in the right hands. It can be very effective even at tier 10 and tier 9 if you know what you're doing. A lot of the cons that we have pointed out previously can be worked around by paying attention to them. Especially the mobility. Choose where you go. If you look into the match, to start up, just analyze and see where your tank might be the most effective with. See if there are hills, if you can hide your lower plate. The rate of fire, obviously, and the accuracy cannot be resolved as easily, but you can have some workarounds. Maybe build a Löwe with the maximum amount of BPM, the best rate of fire. With the accuracy, you can put some equipment on there to give it a bit of better aim time, maybe, to decrease the aim time, to add a vertical stabilizer to give you the ability to still have a small bloom when you're turning your tank or when you're turning your turret. So, for who is the Löwe? The Löwe is a great vehicle for serious players that want to play German super heavy vehicles, such as the E100, such as the E75, such as the Maus, the VK7502, the Mauerbrecher. This tank is really competitive and great for these kind of players that really like those slow, sluggish, heavily armored, with a great gun, heavy tanks. Yeah, exactly. So, who should rather not buy the Löwe? Definitely the players that do not like sluggish, heavy tanks that do not have the best mobility. It's not for them. If you want something that's fast, has decent amount of armor, is a heavy tank, might be the Renegade. The E75 TS would probably be a better option for you. But with its current standing, and considering the fact that at tier 9 and tier 10 this vehicle can be very competitive, and which was back in the days, like 7 years, 8 years, pretty rare, and still is a bit rare, or not as rare as it used to be, I would rate this tank, with my personal reflection as well, a 9 out of 10. This is a very good vehicle if you give it a chance. With the right loadout, with the right equipment, with the right crew, you can do incredibly well with the Löwe. This tank still is a tank that I hold very dearly to my heart, and that can be very, very good in a lot of situations. But it always depends on your outset. Are you looking for a Löwe? Are you ready to pay the $50 price tag for a tank that is about 9 years old? That is always going to be kind of the question of every single player that wants to buy a premium tank. But I can say that the Löwe, I never regretted buying it. I still enjoy it to this date, and I still am learning new things about it. Trying different kind of compositions, and I still have a lot of games that I want to play in this tank. Although I've already played over 2,800 in them. And you can see my average win rate with 53% is not that impressive. But we still managed to get the 3 mark of excellence right there. Although it has been dropping a little bit recently because I haven't really played it a lot. But still, it is one of those rare vehicles that I just really enjoyed a lot. And it was just one of the tanks that I was able to play over 2,800 games in. So if I enjoy a vehicle like this, even though I am a super medium tank player, like a player who likes to have mobility and actually values mobility more than armor, well, in that case, it might be something for you. But we're going to wrap it up right now. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, as always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.